The Bush Center is a place that calls people to a higher purpose and aims to inspire service to others. Laura and I believe that to whom much is given, much is required. This is the spirit that guides our work.
The Bush Center is warm and welcoming. Built on the campus of SMU, my alma mater, we invite visitors through our doors to attend public programming that attracts newsmakers and thought leaders for important conversations around the issues we care most about.
The Bush Center is a unique asset. Having a presidential center and an institute combined is something that differentiates us from most places around the country. We're able to go where other people cannot go and access resources that other people can't access. When we talk, people listen. And when we invite, they come. And when we take on a project, we finish it.
When you walk into the Bush Institute, you'll see a quote from my presidency on the wall that summarizes the principles we're committed to. It is important that we continue to defend these beliefs.
We do that through our 3 impact centers: domestic excellence, global leadership, and our engagement agenda. Domestic excellence. To be a great country, you should have strong economic growth, great education, take care of your veterans, and develop future leaders. In global leadership, it means promoting global health, advancing freedom and democracy, and empowering women worldwide. And our engagement agenda is how we spread the word about what principled leadership is and the core values we're able to perpetuate.
The Bush Institute is making a profound difference in the world. The reason is pretty simple. We don't just do policy and research, we put it into action. Through the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, we're training rising leaders across the country. Through the work we do on school leadership, where we work with district officials across the country to recruit, retain high-performing principals in our schools. We're helping post-9/11 veterans and their families find employment through our Vet Roadmap. We've also created the Warrior Wellness Alliance, a network of organizations that represent over 1 million veterans to address the invisible wounds of war and connect more veterans to quality care.
We wanted the Bush Institute to be a place that improved the lives of people at home and around the world. We teach young leaders from emerging democracies the skills they need to help their countries succeed. We equip women from Afghanistan and the Middle East, North Africa region with the knowledge required to become effective leaders. And we continue to ensure that women in Africa who are surviving HIV/AIDS are not dying from cervical cancer.
Following the example set by President and Mrs. Bush, these early results inspire us to do more and to help more people.
We bring people to this great campus and this great facility, but also online through our publications and thought-provoking journals. We're able to carry the messages around principled leadership and what President Bush's example means to all of us.
Having the Bush Center here is really the crown jewel of the campus. Everyone associated with SMU is extremely proud of it.
The value of the George W. Bush Presidential Center to Dallas and North Texas, and I'd say the state of Texas, is truly incalculable.
With SMU, we've hosted conversations with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and with business leaders like Jeff Bezos. Our policy programs benefit from the minds and interests of SMU faculty and students.
My hope is that the Bush Center will always serve as a place where timeless principles are celebrated, protected, and promoted. We just want to make sure the next 10 years are as great as the beginning years of what we're doing here.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and CEO of the George W. Bush Presidential Center, Ken Hersh.
Thank you, and welcome to the Forum on Leadership, and welcome to all those who are watching on our live stream. I want to thank President and Mrs. Bush for hosting this great event, and I especially want to thank them for giving us the green light to go ahead. It's an important day. And I want to thank our great board and Executive Advisory Council and all our wonderful supporters and underwriters who have made this event possible. You heard about the breadth and the depth of our work and what it means to us here that we've been charged by President Bush to do is change lives. And we do that really through 2 ways. We try to approach things the way a presidential center can. We can do that from the top down through policy, advocacy, and awareness. And we can do it from the bottom up by actually running programs that gather attention and make a meaningful impact in people's lives. Whether it be helping veterans through awareness building about overcoming the invisible wounds of war, or actually running a wellness alliance and a veterans leadership initiative. Or our Human Freedom Initiative, where we call out the tyrannical regime in North Korea, we provide policy work for a new administration, and we also raise extra dollars for an educational scholarship for refugees from North Korea who have found their way to this great country. Our leadership programming is really designed to do that. And if we're able to do that and bring that on stage here in our forum, is to bring out the best of what the Bush Center has to offer. Our goal is to bring it to life, and that's what we're doing today and tomorrow. I was stopped recently, completely coincidentally at another event around town, by Byron Sanders, who in 2015 went through our Presidential Leadership Scholars Program. And he said, "Ken, I just want to say thank you." I said, "What are you thanking me for?" And he said, "You changed my life." I said, "Byron, we barely know each other." He said, "No, you don't understand. The Presidential Leadership Scholars Program really emboldened me to think about my personal goals." And he was on the board of an organization here in town called Big Thought, which helps kids throughout our region. And he was on the search committee for the new executive director. So in that search committee, he was actually working on trying to find somebody who would fill that role. In the middle of it, he pulled a Dick Cheney, and he said, "You know what? I think I'm the guy." And he completely changed his life and went into the nonprofit sector. So he was thanking me for that. As somebody who left my private career and took a step back in order to jump into the nonprofit world, I actually understood what he was talking about. It's a true privilege and honor for me to lead this great group of people and to really help carry the messages that were so inspired by President and Mrs. Bush in their public service. I was 26 years old when I started my private investment firm here in town, and I met a young couple with two little girls who had moved from Midland to Dallas to buy a baseball team. And at that time, the gentleman I met before he had to change his first name to Mr. President, I knew him as somebody that we talked about folks in Midland and baseball. What I have come to appreciate, and I wish everybody here could understand, and I hope they do understand, the true essence of what leadership is, and what I've come to appreciate about that man's public service. It's inspirational and it's principled. True leadership is tested when there's no script. And we're sitting here with a library and museum attached across the courtyard, which everybody can go see with your badges. Just go across the courtyard if you take a break. One of the most interesting to me documents is actually a digital display document. After the 9/11 rotunda in the museum, there is a touch screen with the diary of President and Mrs. Bush from 9/11 on that day. And to me, that's a day that had no script. And to watch what happened on that horrific day, to me, shows the essence of what real leadership means. At 9:02 a.m. that day, the second tower was hit. At 9:14, President Bush left the classroom. From 9:15 to 1 o'clock, there's a whirlwind of activity. He's talking to Vice President Cheney, Governor Pataki, Secretary Rice, back to Vice President Cheney. He breaks at 9:44 a.m. Think about that, 9:44, 30 minutes later, and he asks Secret Service to get his daughters and make sure they have extra protection. Back on the phone, tries to call the First Lady, call doesn't go through. Back on the phone with Secretary Rumsfeld, Vice President Cheney, Mayor Giuliani. He finally gets through to Mrs. Bush at 10:52 a.m. They landed Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska at 2 p.m. Security briefings, more intelligence, and more of the noise of the day. At 2:44 p.m., he breaks and places a call to his father, who was on the ground in Brookfield, Wisconsin. And he said, "What are y'all doing in Brookfield, Wisconsin?" And President Bush 41 said, "Because you grounded our planes." They were on their way to Minnesota for an engagement. 2 minutes later, he calls his friend Ted Olson, the Solicitor General, and offers his condolences because his wife Barbara was on Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon. He was a dear friend. Then he's back on the phone, meetings the rest of the day. Through that day, back to Washington, the Situation Room, Secretary Rice, Karen Hughes as policy advisors. Back to the White House, 7:39, he tries to call his daughter Barbara. He finally gets through to her at 7:56 p.m., and at 8:30, he's addressing the country, 34 minutes later. That day, he was a leader, he was a commander-in-chief, he was a husband, he was a father, he was a son, he was a friend. I always, when I'm walking people through, I stop and I said, please digest this display because it's amazing. It shows what happens when there's no script. When there's no script, you have two things to rely upon. your instinct, and your principles. And those were on display then, and we hope that it permeates the work that we do here. What we have at the Bush Center is really a unique asset. And it's a unique asset where we're able to take on work that was started by President and Mrs. Bush when they were in the White House, and then new work as the times unfold that's inspired by their message. We want to be a positive force about American values, and we support those values of economic and political freedom, less government dependency, and a strong and compassionate country. I dare to find somebody who would argue the other side of those three values. And to me, our mission is clear. Because if we engage the world to develop leaders, advance policy, and take action that are consistent with those principles, we will make a big difference. Because policies may change, but principles won't. And all of that will be on display here at the Forum of Leadership, where we will work on being the go-to place for leadership. We'll be able to develop leaders, we'll be able to celebrate leadership, and recognize those qualities that great leaders have. President Bush charged us here to aim high and tackle really major important things. And we have that here. On the agenda, we have 43 speakers. That is a coincidence. We did not plan to have 43 speakers. We counted them up and said, did you realize we have 43? So if you're a speaker out here, you can't cancel, you're locked in, because we can't have 42 or 44. Fate has brought you here. We're going to hear about economic issues from Hank Paulson and Ben Bernanke and Ed Lazier and Terry Duffy. We're going to hear about governing in deeply divided states from John Hickenlooper of Colorado and Susana Martinez of New Mexico. About social challenges in education from Dr. Priscilla Chan, and about medical and technological innovations that are going to revolutionize our lives that have both pros and cons. And of course, we're going to hear from Secretary Rice, Bono, Jeff Bezos, Mrs. Bush, and of course, President Bush about whatever the heck they want to talk about. Also, it's exciting today that we're going to begin the work on what was announced yesterday, and it's fitting for our 5th anniversary of these doors being opened on the SMU campus. That we've combined the Economic Center at SMU with the Economic Growth Initiative of the Bush Center to create the Bush SMU Economic Growth Initiative, which is going to be a think tank focused on policy recommendations to further economic growth and prosperity here in this country. And we hope that that will be a very wonderful combination of the power to convene and the thought leadership of the Bush Center and our economic growth team, along with a major economics research institute across the street. That should be a very powerful combination, and I'm very excited what that future will bring. And I want to thank all of you, because without your support and your engagement, we couldn't make that happen. We have so many programs here and lots of different ways for people to plug in. I encourage everybody to think about what speaks to them about what we do here at the Bush Center and find fun ways to get involved. My call to action for this crowd is simple. You're going to hear what leadership means. You're going to hear lessons. We're going to hear about what had happened in the past and what people project in the future. If you can take one of the ingredients you hear from one of the panel discussions and apply it somewhere in your life to make a difference, we will have succeeded. And that's our goal. Helping me achieve this goal is my wonderful colleague, Holly Kuzmich, who's the executive director of the Bush Institute. She's a veteran of the Hill, the White House, and the Department of Education. She is proof that there are wonderful, smart, caring people who know what they're doing working in Washington. However, we're very, very lucky that she's in Dallas, and she's working here on behalf of the American people. It is an honor, and please join me in welcoming Ms. Holly Kuzmich. There we go.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here, and thank you, Ken. Effective leaders are important in all aspects of society. They drive change and build communities here in the United States and around the world. And developing leaders is central to the work that we do here at the Bush Institute. It's the way that we link policy and thought leadership with action. And leadership never really goes out of style. There's never a day when you don't need new leaders in all kinds of professions, whether it's government, the business sector, healthcare, education, and on and on. And so since the founding of the Bush Institute, we've taken it as our task to develop leaders in several unique ways. We've launched 3 leadership programs here at the Bush Institute. The first is our Women's Initiative Fellowship, because we know that when you educate and empower women, you improve every aspect of society. So we've worked with women from the Middle East, from North Africa, and from Afghanistan to develop their skills and empower them as great leaders. We've launched the Liberty and Leadership Forum, where we train young leaders in Burma on freedom, free markets, and democracy. And we work in Burma because it's a transitioning democracy. And we created the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program in partnership with 3 other presidential centers. So our presidential center here and the centers of William J. Clinton, George H.W. Bush, and Lyndon Baines Johnson. In that program, we develop mid-career professionals to help them take on projects in communities across the country and around the world. And what makes our programs unique? There are several things that we do here at the Bush Institute that we wanted to make sure make our leadership programs stand out. The first is our access to exceptional leaders and resources. We are able to bring in people like President and Mrs. Bush, business leaders, world leaders, people running nonprofits here and around the world that are really affecting change. Second, every participant in our programs is required to take on a personal leadership project. It's the way that participants come in, identify a challenge that they need to solve, take what they learn in the classroom and implement it in their life and scale their work. And third, we seek to inspire everyone who comes into these programs, partly through the leaders we bring into the program and through the network that we develop. They are inspired to achieve more and have a more expansive view of what they can do. Let me tell you about a couple of the graduates of our programs. Emna Ben Arab is a 2014 graduate of the Women's Initiative Fellowship. She's a university professor in Tunisia who has a passion for education reform. She took what she learned in the program, went back to Tunisia, and opened a secondary school. And through the 2 schools that she now runs, serves over 400 students in Tunisia, training them for the global economy. Jan Taik Seng is a 2015 graduate of our Liberty and Leadership Forum. He's a BBC journalist in Burma. He took what he learned about freedom, free markets, and democracy back to his country. And through the radio show that he hosts every week that reaches over 3.2 million people, he's infusing those skills and abilities into his radio show. Darren Roberts is a 2015 graduate of our Presidential Leadership Scholars Program. He's a former NFL coach and a Harvard-trained lawyer. He's the head of the Center for Sports Leadership at the University of Texas, and he created a project called Captain's Academy, where he works with student athletes in the Austin area, and he's created a leadership program for them based on presidential leadership scholars. He's now taking that model. He served over 500 students in Austin and is bringing it across the state of Texas. Those are just a few examples of the over 300 graduates we've had to date in our programs. And we rigorously measure what we do in our work. It's important to inform our work and make sure we're being effective, and to tell those who invest in our work that we're making a difference. And so today we're releasing a report called Leadership in Action that details the results of those programs to date. And the important thing that we found is that we're making a difference. We're making a difference in the way that we hoped we would. And let me tell you a little bit about those ways. First, we have looked at the number of graduates who would strongly recommend this program to their friends and colleagues. It's called a Net Promoter Score. It's widely used in industry across this country. The scores range anywhere from -100 to 100. The business community seeks to achieve anywhere from a 50 to a 70. We got an 89, which is extraordinarily high for the programs that we have here at the Bush Institute. Secondly, we build a diverse network in each of these programs. 85% said exposure to and appreciation of a wider diversity of perspectives increased because of being in our Bush Institute programs. Similarly, 85% of graduates report that the programs propelled their personal leadership projects forward. And finally, we see that more of the graduates of our programs feel likely to achieve their long-term vision. When participants came into our programs, only 30% felt that way. By the time they graduated, that had increased to 86%. All of the graduates of these programs are inspiring, and I'm really glad that over the next several days, you'll get to meet a few of them. And when you leave tomorrow, I encourage you to check out this new report, Leadership in Action, that will be given to all of you upon your departure. The report also outlines the other ways that we develop leaders. So for example, we run our school leadership initiative, where we work with school districts across the country to recruit, train, develop, and retain high-performing principals in schools across our country. Our First Ladies initiative works with First Ladies around the world to develop and use their unique platform to affect change in their countries. And our newest program will be the Stand To Veteran Leadership Initiative, launching this summer, where we will create our next leadership program to work with those working to improve veteran outcomes across our country. And I'm really pleased that you'll meet one of the participants of that program tomorrow at lunch. Finally, I'm really pleased now that you get to meet one of the graduates of our program. Danel Anello is a 2015 graduate of the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program. He's the CEO of New Schools for Chicago. When he came into PLS in 2015, he was new in that role, and he wanted to be able to use what he would learn in that program as the new CEO of that organization. But what he also brought to the program was his personal leadership project. And that was a project to work with parents in the city of Chicago to empower them and give them great educational options for their kids, give them a voice and give them a seat at the table. And through this project, one of the things they had found was that in public high schools in the city of Chicago, there were 292 different applications for public high schools in the city of Chicago, different timelines and different requirements. And think about how challenging that is for a parent, and especially a low-income or working parent, to navigate that system. Well, through his work with Kids First Chicago, they have gotten it down to one common application in the city of Chicago, helping kids and parents and families in Chicago have better educational options. We're really proud of Danel, proud of his work. It started in PLS, and part of what also drives his work is the core of what Presidential Leadership Scholars teaches, which is values-based and principles-based leadership. And so he's here to share what inspires him to lead and how PLS impacted him. So please join me in welcoming Danel Anello. There you go. Great.
You always remember exactly where you were the moment you realize how much something matters. For me, it was my freshman year in my dorm room on the phone with my father. You see, my parents, they were teachers, and they taught in some pretty challenging, tough schools in New Jersey. And they were an interracial couple that came together in Newark, lived in Newark, and in the 60s. And my dad describes being 3 blocks away from the race riots in 1967, and it wasn't shortly after that that they decided that they were going to pick everything up and move. So they moved to the middle of nowhere, upstate New York. More specifically, they moved to Crown Point, New York, where they bought a piece of land on a dirt road, built their own house with 50 miles of woods across the street. And this is the place where they decided they were going to raise 3 brown boys in a relatively poor, all-white mill town. There was my older brother Shane, me in the middle, and my younger brother Gabi. And for us, civil rights and education were absolutely paramount to everything. In fact, you could say dinner was an education for us. My dining room table that I grew up with was a repurposed East Orange Middle School table with graffiti scrawled across the top. And if you looked hard enough, you could find the gum that my dad had missed on the underside. And so I remember growing up next to Willie Brown on my left and Johnny Day on my right. And for us, college was a destination. It was not an option. But the college-going process was something that was foreign to my parents. They had just gone to Newark State Community College. And my graduating class, public school, 20 kids, more of us would get married coming right out of college than go on to college. And so my brother, being the oldest, got first dibs, and he had chosen a school all the way out in Phoenix near my aunt. And when my turn came, I remember my mother sitting me down at that table right next to Willie Brown, rolling out a map of the area, and she was an art teacher, so she takes out a compass and she puts it on Crown Point, New York, and she draws this circle. She says, "This is as far as you get to go. We can't afford multiple tickets home." So my universe. And she hands me this Grand Union paper bag full of brochures I've just been collecting at our door. It says, go upstairs and pick a few schools. And so I did. And I went through the process as many 15-year-olds might in that moment. I went through and I picked out all the brochures that I thought had good-looking girls on them. Except for one, and I remembered it pretty vividly because for a lot of reasons, and that's this one here. See, I saw a mixed kid on the cover, and I saw me. And I wanted to be this kid. And so the financial aid reward letters come back, and this place gave me the best package. And so, unbeknownst to me or my family, I went off to one of the best schools in the country, Williams College. And to say the next 4 years were difficult would be an understatement. They were the most challenging 4 years of my life. You see, Crown Point Central School at the time just didn't prepare kids for college. We didn't have AP courses. We didn't have calculus. We were just dabbling in pre-calculus my senior year. And so I ended up in all remedial classes, and those were the classes that I struggled in every single day. I was fighting for survival. I was hiding in the back of classrooms. I didn't raise my hand for 4 years, feeling like the dumb brown kid. But thankfully, Williams believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I just didn't know how to ask for help or have a compelling enough why to do so. And that takes us back to that dorm room. I remember sitting there in the afternoon, it's about 1 p.m., and I'm studying for Psych 101, which is supposed to be an easy A. And I'm reading this chapter over probably for the 4th time, because that's the only way I knew how to study, was to try to memorize absolutely every single word in a chapter so that I might recall some of it when I got to the quiz. And as I'm trying to get this information to stick and it's just not, I'm thinking, I'm barely getting a C in this class. I'm not sure I'm going to make it through Psych 101, let alone the rest of the semester. And the phone rings and I pick it up and it's my dad. Daniel, listen, we just got back from Phoenix. Immediately, the way my parents rationed out plane tickets, I was a little shocked, but he goes on and he's, listen, we lost touch with Shane. We haven't talked to him in a few weeks. And so we went to find him. And Daniel, I tracked down his apartment and I managed to convince the landlord to let us in. When I went in, what I found was an empty apartment, a bare mattress, and trash everywhere. And at this point, I remember I'm sitting on my roommate Jed's bunk as he just in bullet point fashion relays how my brother in just a matter of a few months has developed a crack cocaine addiction and is out on the streets. And I remember in that moment just feeling like I needed something more. The way that my father was sharing the information was not enough. I said, Dad, can I talk to Mom? No. Your mom can't talk to anybody right now. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. See, my mom was the rock. Strongest woman I know, next to my wife. She could talk to us anytime, anywhere. And I just remember I could sense through the phone, through her silence, and through my dad's way of just relaying this information, the devastation that they were feeling in that moment. And I don't remember the rest of the phone call. I just know I sat back down and I looked at that Psych 101 page, and I made a decision. I was never going to put my parents through that kind of pain again. So I asked for help, as hard as it was. And the minute I did, Williams gave me every support. And it never got any easier. But with each small victory, I grew a little bit stronger. You see, Williams doesn't let kids like me and my brothers fail. They just don't. And I know that because my younger brother, 5 years later, followed me there. Struggled for the same reasons I did, lack of preparation, but he made it too. I just happened to pick up the right brochure, and Shane didn't. And because of that, I get to stand up here and share this story with you. And he's going to be in a prison cell in Victorville Penitentiary until 2022. Had he picked up a different brochure, I can't imagine where he'd be today. But I know it wouldn't be prison. You see, even with two committed parents that thought of education as the gateway, everything, it wasn't enough. We just weren't prepared. You see, I don't think kids should have to fight their self-esteem because of lack of preparation. I go to work every single day thinking about 3 brown boys and how each and every one of them makes it. To me, education is the great equalizer. And when I look at the disparities of access and opportunity that stratify our country and even polarize the outcomes in one family, it seems so evident that this is the civil rights issue of our day. But before PLS, I was afraid of this story. Terrified of what it would mean to unlock that door. And PLS changed everything and so much more. See, PLS helps us understand how the values that we pick up in our journeys are so critical to the why that we do our work. It's embedded in every model, framework, hallway conversation, case study, and it's just reinforced with the incredible leaders, many of the folks in this room who come and share their own personal whys for what they do. I was really apprehensive about telling any of this publicly in the midst of this program when a cohort mate of mine pulled me aside, said, "Daniel, you don't get it. Your story is what helps other people remember their own stories." And so with that, in the last month of this program, I stood up in front of the Commercial Club of Chicago, a room full of the city's most prominent executives, CEOs, and leaders, and I told the story about my family and Shane for the first time, publicly. And true to my cohort mate's words, I'm walking off the stage, and a Fortune 500 CEO grabs me by the arm and says, "Thank you," and starts to tell me his own story about his own brother. A couple weeks after that, I sent a one-way postcard to my brother Shane in his prison cell, just to say, "I think about you every day." A postcard he responded to. And thanks to PLS, I talk to my brother after 15 years of silence every week. Thank you. You see, Williams helped me understand why I needed to ask for help. But PLS helped me understand and discover how that why fuels the work that I do every day in Chicago for kids. Thank you.
Please welcome the George W. Bush Institute's Director of Education Reform, Ann Wicks.
Hi, everyone. Wow, Daniel just teed us up perfectly for a really rich and robust conversation this afternoon. Once upon a time, a young person could graduate with their business degree in hand and embark on a 30-plus year career, potentially in accounting or marketing, but no longer. Today, we can only reasonably predict about 50% of the jobs that are likely to exist in 25 years. Things that are easily routinized will fade away, so that means we'll say farewell to things like cashiers or loan officers or paralegals. Companies are starting to pay attention to this. For example, AT&T earlier this year announced a $1 billion effort to retool half of its pretty massive workforce to upgrade their skills for the future. So how do we know what's the right direction to go? I think a lot about the hundreds of thousands of kids, young Americans today, who are attending low-performing schools. Daniel just described his experience. His story, sadly, is not an uncommon one. Those students typically are children of color. They are living near or below the poverty line. And far too often, those are the same young people who end up in low-wage, low-skill jobs because of their subpar education and the fact that they don't have real choices for their futures. So what does this mean? This brings up these great big questions. When those low-wage and low-skill jobs start to fade, that's the first group that will be disproportionately impacted by this change. What does this mean for America's widening gap between the haves and the have-nots? My lunch table conversation, my colleagues at lunch, we were talking about this. What does it mean for America's competitiveness globally? And we don't think of this as a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. This is an important American issue. So at the Bush Institute, we think that schools that well prepare all of their kids for success in their futures typically have two things in common. First, they have a strong principal, strong leader. Holly was talking about leadership. Second, they embrace accountability. So first, think about the very best boss you ever had. You can borrow someone else's if you never really had a great one. You have them in mind? All right, so that person likely challenged you, but they also supported you, right? They were invested in your success. They had your back. That is exactly what a great school principal does for the adults and the kids in their building, right? They hire and retain, that's important, great teachers, and they set a positive school culture for the kids and their families. Early in my career, I taught 8th grade social studies. It was equal parts awesome and incredibly difficult. I was working really hard, but honestly, most days I was kind of flying blind. I really needed some expert help. I'm not ashamed to say that. Me and this rooms of 13 and 14-year-olds. Ultimately, I'm not really sure if my kids got what they needed from me in my classroom and were prepared when they took their next step. I think I saw my principal maybe once in my classroom that first year, and I ended up taking an opportunity outside the classroom over the summer, even though there was a lot I really loved about teaching. That still makes me a little sad 20-some years later when I look back on it, because I think, what could have been different for me, but most importantly for my students, had I had the mentorship of a strong instructional leader as a principal? That's why at the Bush Institute, our work is designed to support school districts in their ability to recruit, support, and retain those highly effective school principals in every school in their district that do all those things that enable student success. So like school leadership, we also believe in strong accountability. You hear that a lot in education. Here's how we define it, pretty simply with 3 elements. First, you set high standards for what students should know and understand. Second, you measure their progress to those standards. And third, you use that data to meaningfully design and implement interventions that are going to support student success. We think this matters so intensely because it reflects the belief that all kids, regardless of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, geography, deserve to learn and succeed and deserves access to a great school. But sadly, that's not the case in many places around the community. Again, Daniel was telling you about this. If you and I went to visit some struggling schools this afternoon, you'd likely hear or see, implicitly or explicitly, things like, well, some kids are just never going to do that well, and gosh, it's really hard to catch some of these kids up. So President Bush very memorably described this phenomenon of assigning different expectations to certain kids as the soft bigotry of low expectations. It was a powerfully said phrase then, it's powerful now, and it guides much of our work. At the Bush Institute, we seek to support city and state leaders to understand and embrace accountability in their education practice and policy so that all kids in their communities and in their states have access to a great school and, more importantly, have genuine choices for their futures. So when we think about how should we redesign education, let's not forget what we know. No matter what kind of school it is, if the kids are in charge or not, you got to have a strong principal. And number two, no matter what kind of job a child has, eventually, they're going to need to write, do math, and problem solve. So it would make sense that we would measure their progress in those areas to make sure that they're on track. But we also know there's a lot still to discover about how kids learn and how we should meaningfully measure their success. And so that's why today I'm so delighted and honored to introduce you to our special guest, Dr. Priscilla Chan. For those of you who don't know her, Dr. Chan is herself a physician and an educator. She is the real deal. In 2015, she co-founded the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative with her husband, Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook. Priscilla and Mark have committed to pledging the bulk of their personal wealth to give it away during their lifetimes. That's already resulted in significant philanthropic investments that the public is benefiting from, including several in education that we'll talk about today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Priscilla Chan to the stage. Thank you. All right, Priscilla, welcome to Dallas.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here at the Bush Center, and I just want to acknowledge that, in our work in education, we stand on the shoulders of the work Barbara Bush did, so she will be missed.
Yes, thank you. She was an incredible role model in her work in literacy. We're so glad to have you here and to hear about your work that you're doing. So why don't we start with telling everybody what is the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, commonly known as CZI, for those in the know. What is it?
Well, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative is a philanthropy that Mark and I founded 2 years ago. We always knew that we were going to give back, but we always thought it was going to be later in the future. And then we've got pregnant with our daughter, Max, and we had that extremely human experience of, oh God, the future is now. She's coming, and if we want her to live in this incredible world that's beyond her wildest dreams, we needed to start doing our part in helping build that world. And so we did it. We launched CZI in the end of 2015 with the goal of building a philanthropy that engineers change at scale. And what we do is we fund work in three main areas. We work in education, science, and a group called Justice and Opportunity. But one thing that we're incredibly aware of is that while we may have significant resources, we are small. And we need to be very careful about how we leverage our opportunity. And what I mean is, if you think about scale of resources in science, our annual budget in science is a little less than $300 million a year. But the NIH funds $30 billion a year. So what can we do to actually create change in science with our work? And so we really took a step back and really thought, beyond resources, what else do Mark and I bring to this work? And with that, we thought about our day job of who we are. And that, for me, that was being a school teacher and a pediatrician, having been on the front lines with families and children, and realizing that you really need to be there on the front lines to understand what the real barriers and problems are, and that incredibly innovative solutions already exist on those front lines. They're just often one-offs that don't have the opportunity to scale and reach many. And I've been lucky enough in many ways to be partnered with Mark, and he brings the lens of a technologist. He's built a career in building great tools that scale to reach many. And so we took those lenses together and boiled down to a couple of core values that we think about at CZI. We want to stay close to the problem. We have the luxury and patience to invest for the long term. And we also know that collaboration across sectors is key, will be key to our success at CZI.
That's great. So I have to tell you, when I was in your offices, I was struck by two things. The first was, it reflects a little bit of what you said. Everyone I spoke to, and I met with a number of folks on your team to get a sense of the work you all are doing, and they commonly have a boldness of purpose and a total humility in their approach. And can you tell us a little bit about how will you all define success? Because you are talking about long-term, you're early in your lives as you started this, so how will you define success for CZI?
Yeah, so we've set incredibly long-term goals for our work. And so that means in 50 to 100 years, every student is empowered to learn and be prepared for a changing world. In science, we want to cure, prevent, or manage all disease. In justice and opportunity, we want to be able to be part of building just systems that allow all individuals to contribute to their community. But that's really long-term. What are we actually going to do, and how will we know? Yeah. I painted the beautiful picture.
Thank you for asking yourself that question.
Yes. But it's really it's part of whether or not our experiment in really thinking about philanthropy in a different way is hopefully in 10 or 15 years we'll have refined that and we'll understand how it works. Because at CZI, we don't just do traditional grant making. We do grant making, we do for-profit investing, we do advocacy work. We lift up a lot of the stories of our partners in the community, and we want to build a movement that's bigger than us. And I think most unique is we build technology. About half of our organization is technology, and we build tools for the folks that we are trying to serve in education, science, and in the justice and opportunity work. And for that means that one, we've learned and we understand how our model really works, and we can choose great problems to apply that toolkit to. But then in education, we are really in a world where teachers are demanding better tools for their work, and they're able to better serve the students where they are every day. In science, we should be seeing those early breakthroughs in our investments in the infrastructure that we're building today. And in justice and opportunity, we're taking the lessons learned in the hotspot communities that we're supporting. They're doing great work and scaling those to really be able to reach more communities in need.
So that brings me to the second thing that I observed when I was in your offices. It is a bullpen of engineers working on like dual screens around. It reminded me of the startup I worked in right after college in the first tech boom. How are they infused in your work? It's completely distinctive, your structure of CZI and the fact that you have so many engineers on your staff. So how does that work? How do they inform or execute your strategy?
Yeah. Our engineering teams work incredibly closely with what we call our initiative teams. In science, they work side by side. The engineers are building the data infrastructure for something we call the Human Cell Atlas. We think of it as the next generation of the Human Genome Project, where we understand cells in different cell states. So the engineers are building that infrastructure, but they're not building it in a box by themselves. What they're doing is working closely with the scientists on our staff, but also scientists in the field actually doing that work to figure out what the needs are and building and iterating alongside them. And the strategy between technology and the programmatic work is one. There is only one strategy, and we collaborate. But everyone has the lens of where we are actually leveraged to be able to take advantage of our full toolkit. A very similar situation is in education, but our partners are in the field. We are partnered with a group, several groups, but most prominently the Summit Public Schools, where we are learning from their pedagogical approach and what they need for their teachers to succeed in the classroom, and building them tools and technology to help them do their work better and also share their approach with other schools that are interested.
Well, let's turn to education and talk a little bit about that. But I know your own personal experience growing up and as a physician and educator have really informed the strategic tact you've taken. Tell everybody a little bit about your story.
Yeah. You know, Anne said nice things about me before I came out, but it misses something that's so core to who I am and why I do this work. You know, it's incredible that I'm here today, and that's the second half of the story, but the first half of the story is more important. My family were Chinese Vietnamese refugees to this country in the 70s. My grandmother was illiterate and you know, worked supporting a family as her employment. And my parents showed up as boat people and refugees to this country with very little. And I was lucky enough to be in a great public school system where a couple of teachers really saw potential in me and supported that. And so thanks to a couple of people who took the extra time, I was able to show up at Harvard Yard that first day. And like, if you just froze my life on that day, would have lived the fullest version of the American dream. But I realized also that I owed everything to a few folks who showed me what was possible, and that there are many, many folks like me, and Daniel, who shared his incredible story, that don't have that opportunity and didn't get lucky. And so right then in college, I grew up very close to Harvard, and I decided to run an after-school program that was in the next community over from where I grew up in a low-income housing project, and helped kids with their homework there. And I was 18, super idealistic, wanted to help some kids with their homework and do better. But what I saw was there was an incredible number of barriers that prevented kids from even getting to the classroom, so forget their homework. Kids were unsafe, involved in gang violence, lived in unclean housing conditions, had a number of medical issues that needed tending to. And there's a little girl that I remember well that then compelled me to become a physician, and she had missed a number of days of school, and her school counselor came by looking for her, and I said, sure, I'll help you find her. And I walked out to the playground, and I found her almost immediately, and I was really actually upset with her. And when I asked her why she had missed school and had not been to the after-school program either, she started talking, and her front 2 teeth were broken. And I had so, just crushed, and so many questions, and where I had failed in not doing my part to prevent her from getting hurt. And so, I was 22, and the solution to that was to go to medical school. So I spent a decade training to be a pediatrician in San Francisco Safety Net Hospital. And I ended up succeeding in that I became a doctor taking care of the same kids that I had been working with in college, except this time I was a physician and I was making diagnoses, but there were no prescriptions for actually what was going on and keeping my patients from being successful. And so I saw the flip side of the same problem, but still helpless. And that's what really prompted me to try to take a step up from that front lines and think about how we should be doing work differently on the systems level to make sure that these great public systems that serve our most underserved children are actually doing their job.
Well, yes. So part of what your experience was to keep learning, right? You just kept learning, and that has been such an important driver for you. Part of our topic today is about the importance of that sensibility for kids, like what it means to become a lifelong learner. And tell us a little bit about what skills or what you think is most important for kids today as they're looking forward.
This is not going to sound humble, and I also think it's true of all of you in this room. I was a really good student.
Totally.
Were you guys pretty good students? But what that means is that I am really good at sitting in a lecture hall just like this, listening to someone share information, write it down, and then tell it back to someone later. I'm still really good at it, and if I were in your seat, I'd really having a good time. I'm having a good time up here too. But like when I actually went to work with families, build the primary school, build CZI, I didn't have any of that skill set. No one ever prepared me for that. You know, I asked my friends who got MBAs, I was like, did they teach you this? And they were like, no. So the core of it is our current systems, even if we are wildly successful, don't actually prepare students to do what they need to do in the workplace. And what my hope is that we actually think about how we can actually change that, how we can actually educate our students in a way that prepares them for the real life workplace. And where I've seen it most successfully in K-12 education and where I get a lot of my inspiration from is actually a school visit that I did to a group called Summit Public Schools. I walked in to their small school network in the Bay Area in Washington. I walked into the school and I didn't recognize where I was. I saw middle school and high schoolers working in all different types of configurations. There were groups of kids problem solving together and teaching each other about how to solve a problem that a teacher had posed to them. I saw teachers working one-on-one, having a mini conference on what a particular kid needed. I saw a kid working by themselves on a project that I didn't even recognize as something that you could do in school. He was building, he was working on a web media project. And my question was like, what is this? Where am I? Because this is what I see folks actually doing in the workplace. Problem solving on their own, applying what they're learning in a way that's meaningful in the real world. And when they don't know how to do something, they know how to actually ask for help and get the right resources. And what I realized in that school visit is that this group had been able to really flip what the classroom looks like historically to what would be preparing kids for success in the future. And that's why we've been so proud to be supporting and sharing their work with even more schools to do what Summit has been doing.
If you get a chance to visit a Summit charter school, public school, take it. They're fantastic. You all, CZI has made some investments in personalized learning, what you're talking about. I think we have a video clip that will help folks explain your approach. So we'll take a look at that, and then we'll talk a little bit more.
The average kid with a one-to-one tutor compared to kids in a normal classroom, average, the 50th percentile kid will outperform 98% of the kids in the other class. Okay, now I know it is not about the kids. It's about, can I actually create the kinds of learning experiences that let any kid get the kind of benefit that you get when you have a one-to-one tutor?
How do we actually learn how kids learn? And can we make that portable to be able to be adaptive and personalized to what a kid needs?
Imagine that you are a teacher and you have one student in front of you. What does the student know? What don't they know? What do they think they know that they don't know? What are they interested in? How motivated are they to stay? Can the student see the board? Those things have a huge impact on how you think about how you teach. Now, imagine you're that same teacher, but you have 35 kids in front of you. If you're talking about a middle or high school teacher, they probably see 150 students a day. And you still have all of those same questions that you need to resolve in order to figure out how to reach every single one of them. It's extraordinarily difficult for any given teacher to keep that in her head for every student that she serves. And I think by recognizing that you're trying to empower people and provide them with tools, we're going to actually hopefully create things that let us make dramatic progress on the thing that matters most, learning. And then the big question is, can you do that in a way that makes that accessible to every single teacher everywhere so you can ultimately take it to scale? That's what we're uniquely qualified to do at CZI.
So that's a great snippet of this work. You mentioned Summit and how your investment is helping to scale what they're doing to other schools and districts. Tell us a little bit about that investment and what you're learning so far.
Yeah, so Jim talks a little bit about personalized learning in this video, and it's a term a lot of folks in education are using, but I want to anchor this in that it's not anything new. Personalized learning is just great teaching, and it's being able to give the student that's in front of you what she needs at the right moment. But like Jim talks about, it's incredibly hard to do. And what we hope to do is actually just make that easier so that all teachers can practice in a way that is best for student outcomes. And what we've done is actually work closely with Summit to think about their pedagogical approach and what they think they've done to achieve the outsized outcomes that they have at their schools. And we take that and we've helped them build with our engineering team a tool called Summit Learning, where we've embedded a lot of tools that help them achieve their pedagogical school model and paired it with professional development with training for their teachers. And with that tool, we've actually been able to spread their approach that's built for schools, by schools, to schools nationwide, where we now support over 300 schools nationwide and over 50,000 students. And there's actually I will give a shout out to one of our star districts, Pasadena in Texas, that has really done a fantastic job. And we're excited about their work, and they're excited to help us improve. But the core of it is a couple of pieces. We help build project-based learning. We build time and space for one-on-one mentoring, and we allow individualized pathways to understand where each student is and what the next step they need to take to advance and what the best modality might be for that student. And so it's really a partnership with the schools to figure out what needs to happen for students, and us building the tools to allow many more schools to be able to access that.
So it's always a great strategy to commend something in Texas while you're in Texas. So well done. So I want to unpack a little bit of what you just described, and to talk a little bit first about technology, and then about teachers, and then about students and their experience with personalized learning. So sometimes people get nervous when they hear about technology or screens in classrooms. So are you talking about a kid sitting in front of a laptop and the computer teaches them, or is it something different?
That is the worst. As a parent, I totally understand the concerns, and I agree with the concerns. You don't want your kids sitting in front of a computer all day, and that's not what we're aiming to do. I actually had a conversation with the superintendent of the Pasadena, Texas school district, and we were like, we hate it when they use that stock photo of a kid behind a computer all day, because that's not what we're trying to achieve. The technology is not the centerpiece here. It's really about empowering the teacher and giving the right tools to the student. And so what we're talking about is actually using technology to make it the job of the teacher easier, and being really able to highlight those individual relationships that need to happen to make great teaching happen. And I want that for all children, and I know that that's what put me on the path to being able to be successful.
So you talked about teaching there. What is the teacher's experience when personalized learning? Are they needing to learn a new way to operate or teach, or what are they telling you about what they like or don't like about using this model in the classrooms? What are you seeing? The teachers are really excited about all the learning that needs to happen. And so it's not something you can sort of open out of a box and do it one day, because it's not a singular tool, it's an approach. And we've invested a lot in building summer training and professional development for teachers and school leaders and district leaders to be able to understand what they need to do to make to be part of this new school model. And so it's time intensive, but we've seen incredible commitment from school districts and teachers that want to do this. And what I've heard that is the most rewarding is that it opens up the window to not
teach to 30 different kids and maybe hit the mark with a few students, but they've been able to develop these one-on-one relationships in a deep understanding of what each one of their student needs. That's the meat of it. That's the heart of personalized learning. And we're trying to do a lot more to make sure that that happens. But that's a partnership. That's not something we can just build into the technology platform. And that's not something, it requires the school really rethinking the way school works.
What did the students tell you? Do the students like it? Do they think it's harder or easier, or do they shrug, like sometimes teenagers will shrug?
What I've seen is students are most excited about the project-based learning because they spend a lot of the day asking why. Why am I doing this? And sometimes there really isn't a good reason if you don't try to think about it. It's like, do it just because, and that's awful. But with the projects, they see why. And, you know, there's one student we were talking with, and she was working on some writing and literacy skills. And that was okay. But when she got to apply it to a journalism project, and then she started writing blogs and actually doing a podcast, she got so excited about what she was learning, she went back to figure out what other skills she needed to do what she was doing better. So to push deeper into the meat of what we want all students to be learning, but also building incredible confidence about what she was able to do. And then, you know, asking the question, is this what I want to do when I grow up? Maybe, maybe not. But like really having that spark of, wow, I can do this, is the thing that inspires me.
Yeah, inspires anybody who knows a kid when you see the spark, right? Part of the work we do with districts, we know there's a lot of power in bringing them together when they're learning new things. I know that's part of your model. Tell us a little bit about how you're connecting these educators who are testing out this summit platform around the country.
So we've had a number of convenings around the country where we bring together school leaders at all levels to really get a sense of what they're interested in and what their barriers are. Because this is not something static that Summit is sharing or we're building. It's something that is really built based on feedback and collaboration about what needs to get done to make it easy for teachers and to actually produce outcomes. So we're trying to make it better every day, and we really appreciate and value the convenings where we can learn from those actually practicing.
Great. Let's make a little shift to the primary school, the school that you helped found, which right now sits in East Palo Alto, if those of you familiar with Silicon Valley. East Palo Alto has had somewhat of a notorious history. I think we have a photo up of students at work at the primary school. This is an integrated education and health model. Tell everyone a little bit about how it came to be and what your model looks like in action.
Yeah. The primary school is a separate organization from CZI. I think in a fit of finishing residency, I thought I could do everything. So I launched the philanthropy and the school at the same time. And the school, it's really built upon the experiences that I shared with you, and really feeling like I had failed as a after-school teacher and a school teacher, and then failed as a pediatrician. I was not able to actually help the kids succeed and be on a productive track in the way that I want to be. And my realization was that in primary care, we have a lot of information, but none of the treatment arm to actually make the changes we want to see in the way kids are kept healthy. We are not able to do the preventative work that we want to do. And on the education side, school teachers are not able to actually educate their students often because they are coming in with so many barriers and challenges that they're not ready and present in their seat to actually learn. There's a lot more going on there. And so what we aim to do at the primary school is actually rethink the way these two systems work, at really putting the kids and the parents at the center of it, to have the systems be greater than the sum of their parts. And so we are working at really rethinking the way primary care works and the way education works. We take a whole child approach and thinking about what each student needs to succeed. And a couple of examples of what we do. We have an asthma program. Asthmatics miss a lot of school, especially in the winter. And they also, when you look at K through 12, they are behind their peers, and a large part of that is because of their health issues. And so we do, at the primary school, we do regular health screenings, and we look at their asthma control. And when it's not well controlled, we send a note to the pediatrician who can tune up their baseline controller medications to try to keep the kid in school more days. We also look at issues like homelessness. We have parent coaches that help the parents understand what do we need to do together to help you be successful. And that ranges in issues from homelessness to food security to looking for employment. One thing that was most surprising to me the first year we opened the primary school was that our students who we knew were marginally housed, we couldn't wake up from their naps very easily. They would nap all afternoon. And we were kind of stuck there saying, do we wake her up for math or do we just let her sleep? And that's an awful trade-off to have to make. But we were seeing those real-life consequences of the challenging circumstances our students were in. And so we work closely with the parents to help improve access resources to improve their housing situation, but also working with them, with their pediatricians, to really think about their sleep hygiene and how can they build those better habits today. And so we're working and really redefining what the factors are for success, and also building systems to help put the parent at the center, but really weave together our important public systems so that our students can be successful.
When I was meeting with your staff running the primary school on the day-to-day basis, I was really struck by how they're grappling with these incredibly challenging questions. Nothing is simple in this work. And we started talking about scale. So I was thinking, is your plan to open lots of the primary school? How are you thinking about scaling the impact and lessons that you're learning in East Palo Alto?
We are very cognizant that we can't serve all the children that need more support. And so we have to think about what can we do in a replicable and sustainable way. And we don't want to be one special school that gets great results because of all of the unique opportunities that our students might have. And so we actually, we're a small school right now. We have about 150 students, but we have 2 folks dedicated to thinking about data, what kind of outcomes we want to be tracking, and how we can actually think about what we do as portable programs to share with other schools. So we don't want to be in the business of building many schools. Frankly, that's both exhausting and not the most effective. But how can we actually share our best practices to other schools who are interested in doing more and learning from our experiences?
CZI works in a number of areas, not just education, although it's my personal favorite. We know you do other work. And I saw some interesting posts recently about your work in criminal justice reform. And obviously, there's no silos, really, between the topics that you're working on. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in the criminal justice reform work in your shop.
Our criminal justice reform work is related in what we call justice and opportunity. We want to make sure that we are helping build just, fair, and forgiving systems. Because in order to build strong communities, we need to make sure that every individual has the opportunity to contribute. And if they have committed a crime, that it's adjudicated fairly, and then there's an opportunity for forgiveness and rehabilitation. And so we've really been working closely with learning about the space. There are a couple of properties that are really interesting to us. One, it's something that folks in all parties are excited about, and that's really unique. And our hope is that we can actually be part of a nonpartisan movement to actually improve the way our criminal justice reform movement works. And the other thing that's exciting is that it's work at the local, more local level. It is state and county-based work, and that means that we can learn quickly when it's a problem that can be solved by different folks in different circumstances, and there's not one decision maker or one chance to actually try to solve the problem. We can learn from folks. And, there's recently great work in Louisiana and then in Mississippi passing common sense measures that we're able to support. We can take those learnings and share them with folks who are doing work in Oklahoma, and just so many more opportunities for learning for us to be part of a greater movement that can get better over time and try different tactics.
I know part of that same initiative, your opportunity side, our next panel is talking about economic opportunity. What do you have cooking there? I know you're a startup. Everything's sort of new ideas. What are you excited about learning in that space?
Well, economic mobility is definitely our most nascent work, and right now we're in the exploration phase. We want to learn about what are the best practices out there, and I've actually learned a lot from folks here today about work where we can help especially young people build the skills that they need to be successful in the workplace and in the changing economy. We don't want it. The world is changing quickly, and that's a good thing, but we need our workforce to be able to change quickly and adapt with them as well. And we've recently launched a couple of grants. One's called the Community Thrives Challenge, where we're just asking a question. Tell us what you're doing that is really changing outcomes for young folks and allowing them to be on a pathway to success. And that hopefully will put us in touch with individuals doing great work in local communities, learning from them, and trying to figure out if we can help them scale and reach and impact more people's lives.
Great. Well, there's some experts on the next panel. They might be helpful, perfectly timed. So as you've seen, leadership is pretty serious business around the Bush Center, something we talk and think about a lot. And you described your own personal journey from the kid growing up next to Harvard to co-founding and leading this incredible initiative that's got decades of impact in front of you. Tell us a little bit about your own personal leadership journey and how you view your own leadership now, potentially a little differently than you may have before.
I've learned that it's a process, it's a journey. There's not one answer that you can look up somewhere in a book, and it's really about being patient and realizing that when you don't get things exactly right the first time, that's okay. I wouldn't call it a failure. It's just you haven't gotten it right yet, so try again. And it's a value that I try to live every day. But it also the values that I talked about at the beginning, staying close to the problems, knowing that you are trying to solve the right problem is important, but it also means that you are close to the work and the inspiration that keeps your energy and enthusiasm for the work. It keeps the spark alive. Knowing that collaboration is the tool. I don't know everything, and that's okay, because I get to partner and work with folks who are experts in their fields, and together, we are greater than the sum of our parts. And that this work takes a long time, and this is going to be a lifetime of work, and all that really matters is that we continue to improve and learn along the way.
That's great. We've covered a lot of ground. There's lots more directions we could go, but I know we don't have all afternoon. The stakes are high for us, right? Their stakes are high in many areas. Tell us, what is your vision of what's possible? What could the world look like if actually all of us working in education, economic opportunities, and these other things, what could the world look like, and why does that matter so much to you if we're successful?
So this is a really good question, and I think each one of you probably has someone or an experience that is really why you do this work. Sorry, I told you.
I know, it's okay. We need, like, on the Today Show when the tissues come down from the ceiling.
Actually, there's someone in each one of in your hearts and spirits of why you do this work. And for me, it's the student I told you about at the beginning, where I was helpless. She was not in a good place, and I didn't have any tools to actually help her. And my hope and our hope at CZ High is that we need to build modern solutions, data-driven solutions that help us actually not be helpless in that moment and to be able to better serve that person, that kid, that adult, that family member in your life that drives you to actually want to do this work and do better. And so what I keep thinking about every time I get excited about something that we're doing is this is helping someone be able to serve and do their work better in the future. That leaves fewer people behind.
It sounds like, yes, thank you. President Bush talks about my charge to keep, his charge to keep. We all think about it. Thank you so much for sharing your charge to keep with us and with everyone here. I'm really grateful for your time and you sharing your experience, and we're grateful for the leadership of you and Mark in CZI and the work that you're doing. So please join me in thanking Dr. Priscilla Chan. Thank you.
It takes so many different things to run a school, and it's very